It's Spoilerin time, folks, where we take all the hard work we do on our other show, Cordkillers, and apply it to our eyeballs by watching television or movies and then talking about them right here. This week, we're going to talk about The Larry Sanders Show, Arthur's Crises, and End of the Season, episode 16 and 17 of season 3. Also, Westworld's season finale, episode 8 of season 3. And Rick and Morty is back from its mid-season hiatus with episode 6 of season 4. I'm Tom Merritt. He's Brian Brushwood.
Heck yeah, man. And, does it pain me to give my honest opinion of what I thought of this Rick and Morty episode? Now, it might be that it was just...
Well, hold on.
Oh.
Let's talk about Rick and Morty. What was the name of this episode anyway?
It had the word Rick in it. The Never Ricking Morty.
Never Ricking Morty.
Never Ricking Morty. Let's talk about that. Brian, tell me about it.
Okay, so every year they've had an anthology series. It started with Interdimensional Cable. That was a whole bunch of, just improvised cable television stuff. Freaking hilarious. In general, really good. It had a strong core story. The B plot was a relationship thing, and meanwhile, Rick and Morty are just watching TV. They, one season later, they titled it Tempting Fate, because they were doing the exact same thing, only this time the B story was like in a hospital. They were stuck in a waiting room. The third time they did something different. They sort of spelled it out. They said it was Morty's Mind Blowers, I think it was called, and also very strong backstory spine. And they did a wink and a nod where Rick looks at the camera and says, "By the way, we're doing this instead of Interdimensional Cable this year." I got really annoyed at how much they kept on shouting that none of this counted. This was just a dumb pitch episode where anything anybody in the writer's room said got made into a 10-second animation, and Rick kept saying it doesn't count, it's not canon. And then it was so on the nose. If you've read about Dan Harmon's story circles and stuff, it was too meta for me. It was so meta as to anytime I dared to almost care about the core story, it would immediately say, stop caring about the core story. And it ultimately kind of lost me. I thought they were good bits. Not my favorite episode.
Yeah, Paste Magazine and you have the same take on this episode. Paste Magazine says Rick and Morty almost swallows itself whole in a too meta episode.
Oh, that's so funny because the comment I made on Weird Things was, who would have thought that Rick and Morty would have itself up its own butt and not have it be a visual gag, like just unironically.
It's incredibly fitting as this episode disappears so far and deep into its own ass.
No way!
Is what Did you write this Paste Magazine article?
That's amazing.
That is, it's obviously a take, it's not just you. I am Schrodinger's Rick and Morty viewer on this episode. Part of me admires just how committed to the bit they are and how far they took it, because they know they've taken it far in the past. And so if they're going to take it far, they have to get as self-referential as possible. And I admired that never letting go, never actually committing to a storyline. And like, okay, if we're not going to have a storyline, we're just going to not have a storyline. We're never going to let it happen. And that becoming the storyline. There was a certain amount of beauty in that sort of outline of a story materializing in spite of itself. On the other hand, I too also was kind of annoyed that we never got a story, and that you had to think about it that much, especially because some of the gags, I guess maybe they fell flat for me. And if there'd been better gags, kind of like interdimensional television, I would have liked it better. But especially early on when they were like, let me tell you the story of Christmas, or let me tell you the story about dating Rick and I'm the Ice Queen. It just, those didn't land as well for me.
The only one that I thought was strong, and they touched on it more than once to set up the kind of running bit, was whenever he insisted that Morty tell a story. It was like a phenomenally bad story, but they acted it out without really spelling it out for you what was happening. And I think maybe that worked for me because it didn't make a big deal of spelling it out for me, as opposed to every other part of the main story where they were constantly spelling stuff out for me.
Well, they were spelling stuff out, but it was also a constant commentary on what a writer goes through. So while they were spelling out what they were doing, the implication was The why is because a writer has to do these kinds of things. So I didn't feel like everything was spelled out. In fact, the things that were spelled out were the things that would have been obvious anyway, which maybe is why it bugged you so much. You're like, why are you spelling out things that I don't need spelled out?
You know what?
And
That's a
you're
good
not
point.
spelling out the subtler implications that you're making.
Like the messages they had, like, boiled down to, writing is hard. We're not infinite resources, you know. And I'm like, cool story, bro. You work for me. Now get back to work and tell me a good story.
Yeah. I did like the idea of like, but all stories are really a structure and a narrative. And in the end, we're just right now we're ripping away that topsoil and letting you see the skeleton of it. I liked that part of it.
I can imagine if you're unfamiliar with that structure, this would be fun and revelatory in a Rick and Morty kind of way. To me, it read as thinly veiled complaining from the writing department.
That's interesting. I didn't feel it was complaining, but I get what you're saying. It was a one-off, and that was the other thing is they pointed out that we're not doing a one-off, meaning of course they're doing a one-off, and that's where we're at with Rick and Morty right now. And it's a gamble. I got to respect the gamble they took to say like, all right, when we come back from hiatus, let's just throw everything we have into a meta episode and see if anything sticks. And maybe it stuck for some more than others.
If I was to guess, let's see, a 10 episode season, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe 4 episodes are thematically all tied together or something, and it's like you got to come back with the one-off, or maybe you come back with the most gag-heavy one to please fans, so they have the most to fawn over. I don't know.
What was the episode? What was episode 5? Was episode 5 a one-off or a
was Rattlestar Rick Lactica?
Oh, that was a fairly weak one too.
The snake time travel.
Wait, that one?
Yeah.
Oh no, that one was great. That was one of my favorites of all time. Never mind, I take it back. But it was a one-off.
This episode, Never Rick and Morty, was written by Jeff Loveness, who also wrote Claw and Hoarder, the 4th episode about the wizards.
Oh yeah, that also I thought was one of the weaker episodes for me. That's interesting because, and in fact, if I remember correctly, I commented on how I didn't like that the whole episode was just about how they don't like fantasy for this reason.
And a little bit of the similar thing, right?
Yeah, and heaven forbid anybody should figure out that was the message on their own. They have to keep on shouting that that's the message of the episode the entire time through.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about Rick and Morty?
Looking forward to next week. Still believe in everything.
Next week, Promortius. We'll see. All right.
Oh my God. Prometheus? Okay.
Let's talk about Westworld, the season finale. They've got renewed, so it's not a series finale. Although, in some ways, it kind of felt like they were possibly wrapping up a season and leaving a couple of loose ends in case they got renewed, because they just announced a couple weeks ago that they're getting a 4th season. But I felt about this one, Brian, very similar to how I felt last week, which was on paper, it's a great concept, but in watching it, it felt too simplistic how we got from one place to the next. And then at the end, when the credits rolled, I'm like, what about William? What about Bernard? And it's like, oh, so they saved the wrap up of the episode to after the credits.
Yeah, I think
That's right.
part of the reason it felt so much like last week's episode is because so much of what you have to say about it will be identical. For example, that part where Dolores died was really impactful. Or that part where Maeve had to make a critical decision about whether or not to keep killing Dolores was really impactful. Or
And
that
then Maeve
part
died.
where Aaron Paul found out that he's the important pivoting point to the whole thing was really powerful.
Also, and I
And when the
telegraphed this last
AI
week.
shut down,
Yes,
that was
that was
really
very
impactful. And when one of the brothers who built the thing died.
And when Bernard and Teddy were useless, or whatever, not his name, Teddy. It was
Stubbs.
Stubbs. There you go.
Stubbs. Yeah. I telegraphed this last week. I was going to be disappointed if Dolores wasn't pulling one over on Caleb, and she wasn't. And I'm disappointed that Dolores, in the end, found beauty in freeing the human race to have choice. Just didn't ring true with me. And the saving grace is that, that Dolores came to that conclusion at some point off screen that we didn't see. And gosh, wouldn't have that been nice if there had been an indication of that earlier a little more, but okay. But the Charlotte Dolores not coming to that conclusion and sticking with the original Dolores kind of gave me a little bit of feelings of like, okay, I guess not every Dolores was inconsistent. Maybe this one was glitchy, and I'm glad she got deleted then.
I mean, wouldn't you like the show just a little bit more if you believed for even 1 second that any character was ever truly killed or not able to just come back instantly?
Well, yeah, I mean, they have already said Rachel Evan Wood there. Like they asked Joy and Nolan, is Rachel Evan Wood gone? And they're like, we hope not, but we can't tell you anymore. It's like, well, okay, thanks.
Well, and also like, we know they can rebuild her. We know that they can get more pearls.
We didn't see her pearl get smashed, did we?
No, we didn't. And Hale is a Dolores. Like Hale is like Dolores 2.0.
And there were many other Dolori.
I mean, what with a straight face? Okay, so here's how I can be made to feel better.
Okay.
Okay.
If I think of Westworld as an epic narrative tale, I get very upset and angry. If I think about it as a series of EDM remixes of themes I've seen elsewhere, I can enjoy each season-long album as reminding me. I mean, that was really fun that they did Terminator for a little bit. If I wanted to hear the Terminator theme with an underneath, that was kind of cool to see every generic video game I've played. I mean, I because we've talked about this. It is extraordinarily well executed from beginning to end, but the sum is less than all the parts, and it's very strange to me.
I keep coming back to it being the story. Not even the story, but the writing. It's not the direction. Direction, I think, is great.
It's great.
The acting's fantastic. Cinematography is
sets
wonderful.
are amazing.
Stunts are incredible. Like
the music
really
is freaking badass.
And even the story on paper, when I think about it, I'm like, well, this should work. This is an interesting story. So it has to be in the writing of it. And I, you know, I hate to be that person who just like, oh, the writers are lazy and awful, because they're not. But I don't know what happened, what the disconnect is otherwise. Because when they were like, oh, but Dolores has uploaded the delete thing and is shutting down, I'm like, really? How? Like, I don't want to get caught up in the like, well, that would never happen situation, but you've sold me on the idea that this is an unassailable AI, but at any point some host could be hooked up to it and shut it down. Didn't ring true for me. Didn't make sense even within the world.
So the classic phrase is show, don't tell. There is more telling than there should be. There's a lot of explaining, but off screen, something happened to the so-and-so or whatever. But to be honest, Westworld is pretty good at showing awesome visuals that do make it clear who we're kind of supposed to root for at any given moment.
But a lot of what they show is just magic. A lot of it is just sci-fi.
Because now it's time
voodoo.
For this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't care if I don't know how the robots work. So why do I don't know why that AI thing bothered me.
Now, here is where they're very, very weak. I feel nothing inside for anyone on this show. I am more dead emotionally than any of the hosts when it comes to anyone in this show. And that is not my fault, because in 90 minutes, Men in Black was able to make me care about Will Smith. And
this is a classic Westworld complaint from you. Like,
yes,
you
it is.
Felt
it
the
is.
same
And they've had a
thing.
lot of time to write the course. And it's not even like they get a reset button every season, because every season is clearly a totally different tale. It's almost like an anthology kind of thing. Like season 3 bore no resemblance to season 1. They could have started, and they almost got me to care about Aaron Paul's character until they went out of their way to come up with a lot of reasons and a lot of resets to make me realize that there was no point in caring about him.
I'm glad you said that, because I still care about Caleb, but they reduced the effect of my caring. I cared about him right up to the end. Caleb was my guy, and I felt bad for him, but I didn't trust that Dolores really wanted him to be the leader, or that he should be the leader. And then he ended up like, yep, that's what Dolores wanted. And I was like, oh, okay. Also, they seem to keep making up things about his story without,
oh my God, yes.
For no reason.
Without laying the groundwork for it.
Actually,
his big redeeming quality is that a decade ago he didn't rape robots. Dolores.
told his guys
and
to
Dolores
go
was one of
inside.
them for some reason. My God.
Well, and
Mhm,
I
mhm.
liked the reveal that he didn't that he had killed his mate, because that was a twist. It may be a predictable twist, but it was like, oh, that's part of the guilt that was eating him away inside. It wasn't that he saw his friend die, it's that he's the one who killed him.
Yeah.
Right. I liked that. But after that, it became, and that's because you were manipulated to be part of this ultra elite force that always killed people all the time. And that was hidden from you. And I'm like, you didn't lay any groundwork for that other than saying he doesn't take those kinds of jobs anymore. So I guess there was a reflection there. But then, like you say, when suddenly he's the guy who stopped them from abusing the hosts, so like, we never got the impression that he had ever been in Westworld before, but I guess he'd forgotten that. And it's now that it's too easy to throw things into his backstory that didn't build up his character because of amnesia, which is always a
You
dangerous
could
trope to play
have,
with.
at the beginning of this episode, just thrown in a 5-minute standalone short story vignette, just without giving us any context or anything, showing the battle of that, revealing that it's a training simulation, somehow make us feel his loneliness and make us feel his temptation to go along with the sexual abuse of the liberated folks, and then let us see him make the right decision without ever spelling it out and telling us, and then snap back to reality, make us wonder what was that, and then link that at the end of the episode to being that's the reason Dolores noticed that moment, and that's why she picked him or something like that.
I talked about this on the Weird Things podcast today, but do you guys watch the behind the episode after things on this, Tom? Do you?
I don't, but I know Tom sometimes does the behind the scenes stuff.
Every time I watch those, I go, yeah, those are really good questions and statements and cool things that the show and the script that you just wrote do ask, and you saying them breaks like for this one, it's like are humans can't evolve, but the robots can. Are humans more robotic than robots? Like, I think that's a really cool idea that doesn't surface ever in this episode or really much of this season, other than very deep subtext. I think that there's not a lot of good surface writing that takes to critical thinking or even hints at, like, it tries to guide the viewer into, like, here are the questions you should think about. Here like
No. It actually does tell you that that's the question. They're like, see, we had this program that was determining people's fate. Is it like they do both of what you're saying, Bryce? They both have it deep in the subtext, and they have it told to you, like they are this, rather than you figuring it out and wrestling with the question, right?
Mm-hmm. I always just feel weird when I watch those, because the past few weeks I've been like, yeah, I think it would have been cool if I had thought that thought in the previous 50 minutes instead of right now.
Now,
Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 47% based on 15 reviews, saying the consensus of critics was Westworld undermines its third season's big ideas by rushing to conclusions, hiding behind cool visuals instead of letting its characters to grow, turning a once innovative show into just another sci-fi series.
Maybe it's our own fault for expecting it to be something that it was never intended to be. Maybe they always meant for it to be a sci-fi anthology where each season was fairly independent from each other.
But I don't think that they do a good job of splitting them out, right? I mean, we're still talking about hats and pearls and the park and Delos property.
Well, I feel like they set up the possibility
you can use
that
pieces from each season. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the long amount of time passing for Bernard indicates that maybe we'll get a different story for next season, but I don't know.
Yeah, I really took a long time to remember what Sublime was, and it's also the Valley, and that he having the key, I didn't know what that meant exactly. Why is he dusty? What happened to Stubbs? Is Stubbs dead because he's been dusty that whole time? Like, I had a lot of questions. Anything else on Westworld? The Crisis Theory
What do you guys think about the Man in Black in the after credits scene as well?
Dumb. Didn't like it at all. What a waste of. And in fact,
so you should have saved that
agrees
for
with
next
me?
season.
You know who agrees with me? Ed Harris. Ed Harris was on record saying, "I didn't sign up to be the man in white." He said that this was a very challenging season to shoot because he didn't like all that feeling emotional mumbo jumbo. He wanted to play the man in black, and they essentially wasted him. He just went in a big old circle and accomplished nothing. I don't know.
I mean, honestly, they could have just had him leave. I liked that scene where he confronted all the various versions of himself.
Sure.
They could have had him say, "I know my purpose now," and had him leave, and we never saw him again this season. Would have been fine with that. They shouldn't have brought him back. They shouldn't have had him with Bernard. It didn't make any sense for him to be with Bernard and Stubbs. And this post-credits scene should have been in next season. I should be wondering what happened to William out there. He's found his purpose. What is it? And the next season, he shows up and he's like, this is my purpose. And then the man in black version of him kills him, and Twisty Time would have been fine then. I would have been happy with that.
Yeah, Xylophanes in the chat says Dolores didn't need skin. You know what? The budget needed skin because that's an expensive effect.
Literally bringing a knife to a gunfight. the sparks, the sword sparks.
Bringing a gun
where
to a
she's
sword
just,
fight.
Like all of that whole, I think they do some interesting ideas with the action sequences, but some of these action effects are just bizarre. Just bizarre. Shooter, you got a gun, shooter. Okay.
Westworld.
All right. That is Westworld, season 3, episode 8. Let's talk about the Larry Sanders Show, episode 16 and 17 of season 3, Arthur's Crises, and end of the season.
Man, a couple of weird shows.
Arthur's Crises Arthur's Crises being Artie having an affair and Larry worrying that he's going to be lured into another job, which then caused Artie and Larry to argue with each other, and then Artie to say he's going to leave, but he doesn't really because he's loyal to Larry.
Yeah, that one was fine weird. Paranoia in the office, everybody thinking that there's a disaster looming, finding out that there's not. It was a little bit of a Three's Company kind of situation.
Comedy of errors.
Yeah. In general, I tend to, we've talked about this, I tend to like it more when Artie is basically God and infallible. We get less of that in this episode. We get him kind of running around and being weak. I
think it's good to show him like getting drunk on salty dogs every once in a while. It's fine to have him like weak and having an affair. We want Artie to be a deep character. So I'm cool with this episode, but I also prefer it when Artie is unassailable.
To be honest, I hadn't really realized this until just now. I like it when Artie is Rick from Rick and Morty, where he's godlike, and let's say he is blasted on salty dog, but then all of a sudden he needs to do a thing and he just suddenly snaps to and then performs. Like that's the moments that I like a lot from Artie. But it's fine. This is their story and they're telling a realistic depiction. I have no doubt that this is based on something or other. But how crazy was the second of these that Roseanne in the early 90s was kind of America's real mom, and with the subject of it being a pill addiction, which is a little bit weird that
out of nowhere.
It's the fake reason that he left last season, and now it's the real one. My guess is they just went through the gamut. They're like, well, Artie's on the booze, so it can't be booze, and cocaine wouldn't be out of character for him, and can't be heroin.
But they've been. Have you noticed they've been seeding this idea?
Yes, they have. They've made jokes. Well, in fact, at the end of season 1, doesn't he say, "Make a promise, no more red wine and Xanax" or whatever? They've indicated that he dabbles.
Like he said he had a pill problem, and he was also taking pills, but it wasn't a problem. And all through this season, they've been like, "Oh, I took the pills out of your desk," and Lara, where are these pills at? So I kind of felt the pill part of the problem was earned. The Roseanne part of the issue was really, really interesting from a historical perspective, because like you said, she's America's mom, and also being transparent and likable about the fact that, like, hey man, I've struggled with addiction, so I'm here for you. I understand.
And also she's the one guiding him through the correct terminology for in making him own his problem. Also, I do feel like it's a little bit weak on showing him any of the much like the drinking buddy one. They just said he's an alcoholic. They don't really show us much of the realistic depictions of any of that. But I don't know that belongs in Larry Sanders. I mean, just saying it.
That's probably why
enough.
They didn't do it. They're like, we need to keep it somewhat of a comedy, right? It's not a very special episode.
So how far do you think the romance goes between the two of them?
I actually spoiled myself on that looking at the description of episode 1 of season 4, which is named Roseanne's Return.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I assumed it just went nowhere immediately because there's no room for that. I wouldn't.
I have a feel. I don't know more than that. We'll find out when we watch the next episode. I'm sure more about that story. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think they're bringing on Roseanne as a major character for Larry Sanders. They wouldn't have the budget. They could only afford a few guest appearances. But
oh
this
my God,
is going
that's
to be
right. That's back when it was making all the money in the world.
I mean, remember that crack that
this-
she makes is like, I'm a top 10 unless that Frasier show does anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's
yeah.
It's she was a powerhouse.
Man, weird.
And they got her for 2 guest appearances so far. And by the title of the first of episode of season 4, it sounds like they'll get a 3rd.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we like this season in general? This the one. This began in Montana, didn't it?
Yep. I believe so.
Yep. This was him fishing and, kind of hiding out. It was fine. It gave me enough of the Larry Sanders jokes and feelings that I love. Not my favorite season though.
Yeah, I agree. Although we have seen a bit of growth. Is it what's the name of the head writer? Phil? Is that
Phil.
right?
Yeah, Phil.
Yeah. So we see development there, and
Janine Garofalo's character has got more lines and more plot lines. So does his assistant.
Still haven't done enough with her.
Oh,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, in the first of these 2 episodes, I thought the most interesting plot line was the Clint Black stuff with
Oh, yeah.
Hank's assistant wanting to
Darlene.
sing and all that stuff, and the 3 side.
Yeah, Darlene finally got like a substantive arc here.
Yeah, I did find it a little bit unbelievable that Larry couldn't even decide how many songs Clint Black should do at the beginning of it. That was a bit hard.
I did find that believable because it seems like a very simple decision, but having put together rundowns, I know that decision affects everything else in the rundown and everything in the edit and how the sound mixers are going to arrange things and turn things around. And if I were Larry, I would be like, yeah, I don't want to make that decision. I don't know what effects that's going to have on the rest of the show because I don't want to look at the rundown and I don't want to figure it out.
Yeah,
He's never been asked the question before. Like it's one of those things where subconscious, like we see it all the time where he's talking through musical acts on the show. So he might not know how many song slots people normally do, right?
Did you know that Clint Black went to the same high school as I did? He went to Katy High
No
School.
kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, Katy, Texas. Yeah, I like that Clint Black thing. I like the Darlene thing. I don't think we get Darlene next season. I think she's gone, but
Question.
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Let's
Because
take that
I
for
keep
granted.
I keep calling her Larry's wife. They were just partners. They were not husband and wife.
Right.
But they do break up during this season. While the season is
will you
airing.
miss her?
Yeah, I kind of have grown to like her. Like she's got a personality. She's not just set dressing anymore like she was in the first couple seasons.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
I think there could be some interesting ways you could go with her potentially.
I will say though, like, see, keeping that in mind as I've watched the last few episodes, I kind of thought that Darlene was written especially ditzy. Like, I know that she's kind of got that airhead vibe, but I think this episode, or specifically the Arthur's Crises one, and one of the ones last week, I was just watching it and thinking like, man, if I was her and I was being given those lines and I was, the fiance of the guy with the name on the marquee, I'd be like, what the hell is he trying to say about me? Or, is it, what is really my portrayal here?
I mean, who knows what happened behind the scenes? I mean, that's I have to imagine that there was some kind of cooperation and agency in there.
Any other thoughts on the last 2 episodes of the Larry Sanders Show, season 3?
I'll be really curious to see if in season 4 they take any hard left turns, because season 3 really felt like more of the same. It's the first time that they kind of tried on some twists, but none of them really especially bit me. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it just needs to be Gilligan's Island and it's the same adventure every week.
Yeah, I would like to see it grow and get a little depth for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen this before. I know that later in the run stuff happens, or the tone or the kind of the overall the little narrative bits kind of change here and there. But So far, it feels like we haven't hit that point yet.
Yeah.
That's the Larry Sanders Show, episode 16 and 17 of season 3. And that's Spoilerin time. Next week on Spoilerin time, if I'm right, we'll be talking about Rick and Morty and What We Do in the Shadows.
Finally.
And the Larry Sanders Show.
Oh, all comedy.
Spoil you then.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.